Davos 2026. Something big is happening. Are we seeing the beast system form? While you were watching the headlines, while the world was distracted by political theater and market fluctuations and the endless noise of social media, something else was happening. This was Davos 2026, the World Economic Forum's annual meeting, January 19th through the 23rd. And what happened there should capture the attention of anyone who takes Scripture seriously. The World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, is not a government. It's not an elected body. It has no official authority over any nation. And yet, the people who gather there have more influence over your daily life than most of the politicians you actually vote for. This year's meeting brought together close to 65 heads of state and government, more than any previous Davos in history. We're talking about leaders of G7 nations, presidents, prime ministers, the people who control nuclear arsenals and economic policy and international treaties. And they came to a private forum organized by an unelected organization to discuss the future of the world. But it wasn't just politicians. Over 850 CEOs and corporate chairmen attended. The people who run the companies that control your data, your financial transactions, your access to information, your ability to communicate, tech pioneers, financial institution leaders who determine whether economies rise or fall. And what were they discussing? Here's where it gets interesting, and this connects directly to the commerce-focused warnings in Revelation that I'll explain in Scene 5. So they gather to talk about dialogue while the world rearms. They discuss cooperation while building surveillance systems. Now I need to show you something in Revelation 17 that would have been almost impossible to understand in any previous generation. Something that fits the modern world so precisely, it should make every believer sit up and pay attention. In Revelation 17:12, John writes, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast." Read that again slowly. 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet. Rulers with power, but without traditional nations. Authority without territory. Influence without the normal structures of government that humanity has known throughout history. For centuries, that description puzzled scholars and theologians. How can you be a king without a kingdom? How can you exercise royal power without ruling a nation? In every previous era, power was tied to land. Kings ruled territories, emperors controlled empires, authority was geographic. If you wanted to know who held power, you looked at a map and found their borders. But something has fundamentally shifted in our generation. And when you understand what's happened, Revelation 17:12 suddenly makes perfect sense. Power no longer flows exclusively through nation-states. In fact, some would argue that nation-states are becoming less relevant by the year, not more. The real power in the 21st century flows through entities that transcend borders entirely. Corporations that operate in every country on Earth. Financial institutions that can crash economies with a single decision. Technology companies whose platforms reach more people than any government in history. And unelected organizations that coordinate policy across dozens of nations simultaneously. Think about the people who gathered at Davos 2026. And remember what I showed you in Scene 2 about who actually attends these meetings. There were CEOs there who command more economic resources than most countries. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, these corporations have market capitalizations larger than the GDP of all but a handful of nations. The people who lead these companies don't govern territory, but they shape the daily lives of billions of human beings. They decide what information you see. They determine what products are available to you. They control the infrastructure of modern commerce. They are, in every meaningful sense, rulers, but rulers without kingdoms in the traditional sense. There were tech leaders there whose platforms reach more people than any government in human history. There were financial institution heads there who can move markets with a statement. Central bankers, investment fund managers, the people who control the flow of capital across the entire planet. When they speak, currencies rise and fall. When they act, economies boom or collapse. Their power is enormous, and it operates entirely outside the democratic process. And yes, there were heads of state, nearly 65 of them. But here's what Scripture reveals. And this is the warning we cannot ignore. Authority divorced from accountability is inherently corrupting. Power without boundaries tends toward control. And when rulers operate above and beyond the constraints that traditionally limited human authority, the result is not better governance. It's the concentration of power in fewer and fewer hands. And here's the pattern that should concern every believer, because it matches what Revelation describes with disturbing precision. Revelation 17 doesn't just mention kings without kingdoms. It says these kings receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. 1 hour. Temporary authority. Power that is given for a season and then passes away. These are not permanent rulers establishing eternal dynasties. They are figures who rise rapidly, exercise enormous influence for a brief period, and then fade as new powers emerge. I am not saying that the CEOs at Davos are consciously serving the Antichrist. I'm not claiming that tech leaders are deliberately building the beast system. Most of these people probably believe they're making the world better. Most of them probably see themselves as responsible stewards of power who are using their influence for good. But Scripture warns us that systems can serve evil purposes regardless of the intentions of the individuals within them. The spiritual forces behind world systems don't require conscious cooperation. They work through pride, through the desire for control, through the human tendency to accumulate power and resist accountability. Good intentions don't prevent bad outcomes when the trajectory of the system itself is corrupt. So here's the question that should linger in your mind. And this connects directly to the warning about false peace in the next section. What happens when authority is completely divorced from accountability? What happens when the people making decisions about your future, about the economy you participate in, the information you access, the technology that shapes your daily life, don't answer to you, your community, or any nation you can vote in? That's not a future scenario. That's not speculation about what might happen someday. That's a description of the world we're living in right now. Kings without kingdoms, rulers without territories, power without accountability, authority that flows through systems rather than nations. Revelation described it 2,000 years ago, and we're watching it form before our eyes. The question isn't whether this pattern is emerging. Anyone paying attention can see it. The question is whether we have the discernment to recognize what it means, and the wisdom to respond as Scripture instructs. Now I need to show you something that happened at Davos 2026 that most people either missed entirely or didn't understand the significance of. Something that should capture the attention of anyone who has ever studied biblical prophecy. And here's why this matters so much. On January 22nd, 2026, in a ceremony on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum, something was created that has no modern precedent. And the language used to describe it should make every believer pay very close attention. President Donald Trump personally signed the founding charter of what he called the Board of Peace. Let me describe exactly what happened, because the details matter, and most news coverage glossed over elements that are prophetically significant. The ceremony was held in front of a select group of leaders. Reports vary, but somewhere between 17 and 21 countries were represented on stage. Trump signed the charter himself, holding up the document for cameras, while the small crowd offered what observers described as tepid applause. The event featured a gold-themed logo resembling the United Nations emblem, a world map surrounded by olive branches, but with distinct U.S.-centric design and gold accents. Critics immediately noted that it appeared designed to rival or even replace the UN. And Trump's own words about this new body should echo in the ears of anyone familiar with Scripture. He called it one of the most consequential bodies ever created. He said it would bring hope and dignity to the people of Gaza. He claimed it could address not just the Middle East, but global challenges and conflicts worldwide. And in a moment of remarkable candor, he stated that once fully formed, the Board of Peace could do pretty much whatever we want to do. But here's what's most significant, and this connects directly to a prophecy in Daniel that I need to show you. Trump announced that he would chair this board himself, and when asked about the duration of his leadership, he indicated openness to remaining chairman for life or beyond his presidential term. The charter reportedly allows replacement only through voluntary resignation or incapacity. A permanent chairman, a body designed to oversee peace, a coalition of nations signing on to participate, and a scope that extends far beyond any single conflict. Now let me tell you what this Board of Peace is actually designed to do, because the stated purpose aligns with something Scripture specifically warns about. The primary focus is overseeing post-ceasefire reconstruction in Gaza after the prolonged Israel-Hamas conflict. This includes demilitarization of Gaza, governance reform, and large-scale rebuilding. Trump and his advisor Jared Kushner have revived visions of what they call a new Gaza, or Middle East Riviera, complete with skyscrapers, economic hubs, and massive development projects. The board would mobilize international resources and enforce accountability for this transformation. But the mandate doesn't stop at Gaza. Trump explicitly expanded the scope to include global challenges and other conflicts, potentially including Ukraine and Russia. He positioned the Board of Peace as a flexible tool that could intervene wherever he deems necessary, claiming it would work with the United Nations while simultaneously suggesting it might supplant aspects of UN diplomacy. Now here's where the participation becomes significant, and this is something most people completely overlooked. Invitations went out to between 50 and 60 nations. At the signing ceremony, countries confirmed as participants included the United Arab Emirates, Hungary, Pakistan, Bahrain, Qatar, Egypt, Morocco, Paraguay, Albania, Armenia, Belarus, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Indonesia, among others. The pattern is striking. Heavy representation from the Middle East and North Africa, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and developing nations. But here's what's equally striking. Who wasn't there? No major Western allies. Not the United Kingdom. Not France. Not Germany. Canada's invitation was actually revoked by Trump on January 23rd, after Prime Minister Mark Carney criticized U.S. isolationism in a Davos speech that received a standing ovation. So what we have is a new international body, focused on peace, chaired permanently by a single leader, with selective membership that bypasses traditional Western alliances and existing international institutions. And the cost of membership? $1 billion for a permanent seat, framed as funding for Gaza rebuilding. Russia's Vladimir Putin reportedly offered a conditional $1 billion donation tied to unfreezing Russian assets, though Russia hasn't formally joined. Now I need to take you to Scripture, because there's a prophecy in Daniel that has been studied and debated for centuries. And what just happened at Davos fits the pattern in ways that should make every believer pay attention. And here's what I want to be clear about. I am not claiming this is the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy, but I am saying the pattern is unmistakable, and that matters. Daniel 9:27 says, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." For centuries, prophecy scholars have debated exactly what this verse describes. But certain elements are clear. A figure, the covenant is with many, suggesting multiple nations or parties. And the covenant relates to Israel and the temple system. Now, I want to be extremely careful here, and this connects to scene 10, where I'll explain what this is and isn't. I am not saying Donald Trump is the Antichrist. I am not claiming that the Board of Peace is the covenant of Daniel 9:27. The conditions for that prophecy's fulfillment include events that have not yet occurred, including the rebuilding of the Jewish temple and the resumption of sacrifices. But here's what I am saying, and this is why every believer should be watching carefully. The pattern matches: a leader confirming a peace arrangement, multiple nations participating, the many, a focus on Israel and the surrounding region. Whether this is stage setting or something more, the alignment with Daniel's language is impossible to ignore. The reactions were immediate and divided. Major Western powers expressed alarm that the Board of Peace might undermine global order or serve as what critics called a U.S.-centric imperial court. European leaders described the logo as mocking existing institutions. Some commentators called the Gaza vision an abomination for sidelining Palestinians in their own governance. But supporters hailed it as a path to lasting peace and prosperity in the Middle East. The White House framed it as visionary leadership that could accomplish what decades of diplomacy had failed to achieve. And Trump himself, wrapping up his Davos trip, posted on Truth Social, "What a great trip to Davos it was. Also, the Board of Peace. Wow." Now here's why this matters prophetically. Scripture doesn't just warn us about war and chaos. It specifically warns us about peace, about arrangements that promise security, about covenants that seem to solve intractable problems, about leaders who position themselves as indispensable to stability. The Board of Peace may be exactly what it claims to be, a genuine effort to bring reconstruction and hope to a devastated region. The people involved may have entirely good intentions. The outcomes may be positive for millions of people. But the pattern, a structure designed for permanence, that pattern aligns with something Scripture warned about long before any of us were born. And that should make every believer watch very, very carefully. Because here's the question that matters most. When leaders say peace and safety, when they announce historic agreements and sign founding charters and promise to solve the world's most intractable conflicts, what does Scripture tell us comes next? Now, I need to pause and say something very directly. What I am saying is that we're watching patterns form, infrastructure being built, systems being coordinated, trajectory moving in a direction that aligns with what Scripture describes. There's a difference between fulfillment and stage setting. Fulfillment means the prophecy has come to pass. Stage setting means the conditions for fulfillment are being prepared. And here's why that distinction matters. And this connects to everything I've shown you and everything I'll show you in the remaining sections. There's a profound difference between fulfillment and stage setting. Fulfillment means the prophecy has come to pass. The specific conditions have been met. The events have occurred. The words of Scripture have been realized in history. Stage setting means the conditions for fulfillment are being prepared. The pieces are moving into position. The infrastructure is being built. But the final events have not yet occurred. Understanding this difference is crucial. It's the difference between wisdom and foolishness, between discernment and speculation, between watching as Jesus commanded and claiming knowledge that Jesus said no one possesses. First, let's talk about the board of peace in Daniel 9:27. I showed you the pattern, a leader confirming a covenant with many, focused on Israel and the Middle East, with a structure designed for permanence. The alignment is striking. But here's what Daniel 9:27 requires that has not yet occurred. The prophecy speaks of causing the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. This refers to temple sacrifices, the system of worship that God established under the Mosaic covenant. For sacrifices to cease, they must first resume. And for sacrifices to resume, there must be a temple. As of right now, there is no Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount is controlled by the Islamic Waqf. The Dome of the Rock stands where the temple once stood. Until a temple is rebuilt and sacrifices resume, the specific conditions of Daniel 9:27 cannot be fulfilled. Does that mean the Board of Peace is irrelevant? Absolutely not. It may be stage setting. It may be a precursor. It may be establishing patterns and infrastructure that a future covenant will build upon. Second, let's talk about Revelation and the beast system. I've shown you how Davos represents coordination of commerce, technology, and governance on a global scale. I've shown you how the patterns match Revelation's description of Babylon: seduction through luxury, control through economics, systems that transcend national boundaries. But here's what Revelation describes that has not yet occurred. The Antichrist has not been revealed. 2 Thessalonians 2:3 tells us that the man of sin must be revealed, openly, unmistakably, in a way that leaves no doubt about his identity. That hasn't happened. We may see candidates, we may see figures who fit certain patterns, but the revealing Paul describes is a future event. The mark of the beast has not been implemented. Revelation 13:16-17 describes a mark required for all buying and selling, a mark of allegiance to the beast. While we can see infrastructure being built that could enable such a system, the mark itself has not been imposed. No one is currently being required to receive a mark to participate in the economy. The technology exists. The coordination exists. But the implementation has not occurred. The tribulation has not begun. The specific judgments described in Revelation, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, have not been poured out. The two witnesses have not appeared. The 144,000 have not been sealed. The specific events that Scripture describes as characterizing the tribulation period are not currently happening. So anyone who tells you with certainty that we're in the tribulation right now, they may be well-intentioned. They may be genuinely concerned about the times. But they are claiming knowledge that Jesus himself said would not be available to us. Matthew 24:36 says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." No one knows, not the prophecy teachers, not the commentators, not the people who write books or make videos or claim special revelation. Only the Father knows the timing, and anyone who claims otherwise is either deceived or deceiving. But here's the other side of that truth, and this is equally important. And this is why I've spent this entire video showing you what's happening. Jesus told us to watch. He told us to recognize the signs of the times. He told us not to be caught sleeping when the hour arrives. Matthew 24:42-44 says, "Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. But know this, that if the goodman of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think, not the Son of Man cometh." Watch. Be ready. Don't be caught off guard. There's a tension here that we have to hold. We cannot know the day or the hour, but we can recognize the season. We cannot claim fulfillment before it occurs, but we can observe stage setting as it happens. Now let me address something that some of you might be thinking. Christians have been seeing signs for 2,000 years. Every generation thinks they're the last generation. What makes this time any different? That's a fair question. And here's my honest answer. You're right that Christians throughout history have looked at their circumstances and wondered if they were living in the last days. The early church expected Jesus to return in their lifetime. Medieval Christians saw the Black Plague as a sign of the end. Reformation-era believers identified the Pope as the Antichrist. World War I and World War II both generated intense prophetic speculation. The establishment of Israel in 1948, the Six-Day War in 1967, Y2K, each of these events prompted Christians to wonder if the end was near. And in one sense, they were all right to wonder. Jesus told us to watch. He told us to be ready. Every generation should live with the awareness that Christ could return at any moment. The early church's expectation wasn't wrong. It was faithful. They were watching, as Jesus commanded. But here's what's different about our generation. And this is why I believe the watching matters more now than perhaps ever before. The convergence, the acceleration, the global scale. In previous generations, the technology to implement global control didn't exist. You couldn't monitor every transaction on Earth. You couldn't track every person's location. You couldn't coordinate governance across all nations simultaneously. The infrastructure that Revelation describes, a system where no one can buy or sell without a mark, was technologically impossible. It's not impossible anymore. In previous generations, the global coordination we're witnessing didn't exist. Nations were more isolated. Communication was slower. The kind of synchronized worldwide systems being discussed at Davos would have been unimaginable even 50 years ago. It's not unimaginable anymore. In previous generations, Israel wasn't a nation. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people were scattered across the earth. The prophecies that center on Israel, and most end times prophecies do, couldn't unfold without a restored Jewish state. Israel exists now, and it's at the center of global attention in ways that previous generations couldn't have anticipated. So while I freely acknowledge that Christians have watched for signs throughout history, I also believe that our generation is witnessing a convergence of conditions that no previous generation has seen. The technology, the coordination, the global systems, the centrality of Israel. All of these are converging in our lifetime. Does that mean the end is imminent? I don't know. No one knows. But it does mean that watching is more important than ever. Living as people who know that this world is not our final home, and that the King we serve is coming back. That's the posture Scripture calls us to. Not fear, not complacency. Faithful watchfulness.